And we are live. Welcome to another episode of the New York Information Security Meetup. I have the great pleasure to introduce Randal Milch, who is the Faculty Director, Master of Science in Cybersecurity Risk and Strategy of New York, NYU, as well as Professor of Practice at NYU School of Law, New York, New York. Welcome, Randy. Thank you very much for joining.
David, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So, just so the audience knows, this is completely unscripted. Randy was kind enough to accept my request to be on the show, and it's always a real pleasure. I mentioned to him prior to this conversation that because he's a senior person and has all this knowledge, people would love to knock on his door and come in and talk shop, basically, and pick his brain, asking for some opinions about current events and so on. But the schedule does not allow him to do that because he's busy doing some other stuff. So the purpose of this conversation is to get to know who you are, Randy, and what you've done so far. And it's a lot. So we only have about 45 minutes, but and also learn something new. So get some value out of this conversation. So Randy, why don't we get started? You've done some pretty amazing roles in the past several years. Why don't we get started on how you got into to becoming a professor at the NYU?
Well, David, first of all, I want to congratulate you on a great show and everything you do here. I think it's a real valuable contribution to cyber and to continuing education for everybody. So you're right. I'm old and I've done a lot of things, and so we won't go back too far. My journey to NYU Law was simply that I had a long career, and I'm a lawyer, and I had a long career in private practice, and then in as a corporate lawyer, I ended up being the General Counsel and head of public policy for Verizon. Was my last sort of paying gig. And when I left Verizon in 2015, I didn't have a very clear set of things that I was bent on doing. But one of the things that seemed attractive was joining a then Center for Law and Security at NYU, which ultimately bifurcated and became the Center for Cybersecurity at NYU, which is a joint effort between the law school and the Tannen School of Engineering. And that had been my sort of primary aim, even though I was a little undirected when I left Verizon. My primary aim was to deal with cybersecurity, which fell under my purview at Verizon for reasons that we can go into later. It was sort of one of those accidents. And, my vision of the way that you ought to think about cybersecurity was that it was a mixed interdisciplinary problem, right? It was a problem that required the lawyers and the technologists to get together and try to solve, because it's simply not only a technical issue. It's a technical and a policy and a legal issue all wrapped up together in a untidy package. So anyway, NYU was very receptive to that, and all of the things that I've tried and to do at NYU in the ensuing, I guess it's almost 7 years now, have been to bring together folks from the engineering side, from the Tannen School, which has a marvelous cybersecurity, very deep, marvelous cybersecurity bench, over to with the law school, and together try to educate a new generation of folks and look at problems and talk about them, which is mostly what you can do at an academic post. You really have to be modest in your view of what you can accomplish there. But that's what I've been trying to do. And that's how I came to my various posts at NYU. As you said, I help run this master's degree, Master of Science program, which is a joint effort, again, between the law school and the engineering school. I'm the co-director of the Center for Cybersecurity, along with one of my compatriots from the engineering school. And as a professor of practice, I try to teach these joint efforts on law and technology at the same time.
So here's a question. So this whole interdisciplinary, this is an whole pretty much emerging area where we find that cybersecurity is no longer a standalone discipline, and it's true for legal, but it's also true for other types of discipline as well. Like environmental, health. I mean, there's just tons, because IT is in everything. So then, therefore, the implication of cybersecurity is in everything as well. You, as a lawyer, first and foremost, that was your kind of your principal education. How did you get yourself smart about cybersecurity? Because it's not trivial. Again, a lot of lawyers, and if you dealt with some law firms in the past, that they're not necessarily very much tech savvy. Maybe things have kind of changed, but they're not notoriously known for being, the bleeding edge of tech. So, how did you get yourself kind of smarter to be able to provide advice at a very senior role to, for example, for the CEO of Verizon?
Well, you're absolutely right in your initial view that many lawyers are those who escaped math, right? And science. There are exceptions. There are some very notable exceptions, and certainly our patent brethren have always been those who have been a little bit more technically minded. But that was pretty much an isolated area. So, cybersecurity fell under my purview at Verizon because I went to the CEO and said, we are lucky and not very good. And this was way back before cybersecurity was sexy. This is, in the mid 2000s. And like any CEO worth his mettle, and Ivan Seidenberg was a tremendous CEO, he basically turned to me and said, okay, you got the problem, you fix it. So that really required bringing together a disparate group at Verizon, and also knocking some heads because it was a very dispersed idea, right? We had multiple networks, we had multiple operating support systems, we had multiple internal networks, every one of them manned by absolutely the best engineers, and every one of them assuring me that they had the best cybersecurity in the world, which immediately made it clear that it wasn't true, right? In order to bring people around and try to expose the problems, it took a lot of meetings, unfortunately, and a lot of holding people accountable in a way that made them act. As to my own, you said I was going to thank you for being so nice and suggesting to folks that I'm smart about cybersecurity. I don't know how I rate myself. I had the benefit of not being science averse as a lawyer, and I think number one is a mindset. Number two, I had a very long set of interactions over many years with the engineers and particularly the IT folks at Verizon because of some of the jobs I had in the past before I became General Counsel. It was very important to understand the way things worked and to talk with them and have them as my experts and witnesses in many, many instances. So, excuse me, I got to know many of them. And finally, it's a matter of digging in and reading and talking to people, right? It's a specialty. I'm a very primitive coder. I'm not a coder. I couldn't give you advice on setting up a firewall to save my life or the niceties of containers. And yet I think that the questions here that I can be useful and I can ask are ones of having read about things that don't work, having read about things that do work in the sense of processes, procedures. So much of cyber and so much of being a successful cyber defense is instituting and being true to processes and procedures that continually shave away at the risk and continually shave away at your vulnerabilities and your threat landscape, right? So the notion of defense in depth and the notion of putting up multiple defenses, it really requires attention to planning, making people live up to their plans, and having a good bullshit meter when folks tell you that this X, Y, or Z is a panacea. And experience, you may believe it the first time, you certainly don't believe it the second time. So that's really my view of it.
I think as a lawyer, you probably have a good, pretty decent bullshit meter as part of your training throughout those years. So tell me, the whole discipline or the intersection between legal and in tech and cybersecurity is fairly new. So that means that a lot of court cases, things that had to be kind of paved in terms of, there's always these exception and new things. It's just like when cars were invented, right? So a lot of accident happened, and then there's a lot of kind of legal framework was built around all those incidents. What is that process like today, and how mature are we, from an expert point of view, about this area, and how did we get to kind of build the foundation? Because today, for example, there are some repercussions for a hacker hacking an enterprise. That may have not been true 15, 20 years ago, because there wasn't any kind of a preliminary type of evidence or cases beforehand. So can you tell me a bit about that process, for what that looks like today?
Yeah, I certainly can. But if I could, I'd like to split it into two a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
So from the standpoint of what makes a useful cybersecurity expert, whether you're a technologist or you're a lawyer, in the effort to build better cybersecurity within entities, in the effort to have a government that is more responsive and a government that's more understanding of what goes on in a business and how they have to react. I think that the need for interdisciplinary work there is very stark. If you look at the NIST, the national educational efforts that NIST put up, if you look at the top technical jobs, and this is a very detailed listing of all the types of jobs and all the types of job descriptions that are for cybersecurity, the technical jobs all have policy and legal aspects to them, understanding what the laws are, the regulations are, and the top policy jobs all have technical aspects to them, right?
That's very true.
If you look at those job descriptions, those model jobs descriptions, there's no question about the need to have interdisciplinary work. Now, you then brought up something that's totally separate in my mind, and that is, how well does the legal system that we have today, the sort of set of externalities that force entities to have better cybersecurity under threat of investigation or fine or damages or any of those things, how well does that work? And I would have to say pretty crappy. It doesn't work well as a forcing mechanism, and that's for a bunch of reasons. The first reason is that it's unkind to say, but it's certainly not overly inaccurate to say that the government, and by here I mean the government, whether it's an attorney general or a regulator in Washington or a regulator in Albany or a regulator in whatever capital city, whatever state you want, it many times seems like their primary role is to walk among the field of battle after a breach and shoot the wounded, right? That's their primary role. That is not the way to get better cybersecurity as a general rule, right? Okay. The efforts that on the legal side, on the damages side, right? The lawsuits that always seem to follow on from a major breach, the class actions and the like. Those, if you look at those, have two components generally. One component is some amount of. They're all settled, by the way, and that has its own role in that I'll get to in 1 second. The last point, but if you look at the settlements. Almost all of the cybersecurity related stuff that the company agrees to is obvious. It's nothing new. It's just stuff they either agree, they thought to themselves, well, we really should have done this the first time and we didn't do it, or we said we would do it and we didn't really do it. So it sleeves out of their vest. That stuff is very hard. It's rare to find anything in those provisions about cybersecurity that are new or interesting or cutting edge, right? And there's an aspect to which good cybersecurity is not cutting edge. It's the blocking and tackling that we don't do. The amount of money that's put out, if you divide it by the number of people whose records are lost in those big things, it's de minimis, right? So it's really not about the money. It's mostly about the money that goes to the plaintiffs' lawyers, and they work for it, and that's our system. And God bless them. I'm not against their ability to make money. I am very skeptical that it's leading to better cybersecurity. This all revolves around the last point, which is the legal standard that's involved overwhelmingly today is one of reasonableness. So was your cybersecurity as a company reasonable? Did you take reasonable cybersecurity steps? David, I defy you right now, and then a month from now, and then a year from now, to tell me what reasonable cybersecurity is.
What is reasonable? I mean, that's eye of the beholder, and it depends. It depends on what industry you're in, what market you're in, what size of company you're. I mean, it's so many variables.
Absolutely, and that's why I come back to saying that thinking about this in terms of a singular duty doesn't make much sense. It's really about employing a process that will lead you to better cybersecurity. What are your assets? It's the same old stuff. What are your assets? What are your vulnerabilities? What is your access regime? What is you just name it. You can go through. What is your patching regime? What is it's the same stuff that experts know about and can read about. And yes, there are many more sophisticated aspects. I'm not trying to cut that down and say that there aren't. I'm saying that for all of the sophisticated stuff at the top of the cybersecurity food chain, what the major financial entities are doing when they spend $500 million a year on cyber, or what the most sophisticated companies are doing, there are 100x, 300x, 500x companies that don't have a CISO, have no one paying attention to cybersecurity in their business.
Or have you don't even have a 2FA attached to their critical assets. It's just some basic stuff.
So you're absolutely right. What is your business? What is your risk? What is your network? Who do you deal with? What kind of information do you have? All that kind of stuff is critical to understanding what reasonable is. And reasonable in the history of the law is capacious enough to take that in, right? Circumstances matter. Reasonable circumstances matter. But because all of these cases settle when they go to court, or nearly all of them settle, we never get a final answer about what reasonable is, right? The FTC enforces the reasonableness standard too, but all those are settlements. We have no idea what reasonable is in any of these instances.
That is so interesting. So the reason why we don't have a definition of it is because there are no cases that they actually went to court, and there's a court case that we can reference after the fact. But isn't it
right? Even if there were a court case, the next case, the CISO would say, "But we're not that company."
Right.
It wasn't reasonable for them. It doesn't tell you what's reasonable for us.
So how do we fix that? I mean, first of all, it's kind of costly if there's no to prove it every time. It will cost you a fortune to even go through the process of proving what reasonable is.
Well, that's why these things settle.
Right, because the onus is now on you to prove what reasonable is. And then, so what about maturing this? We know, for example, again, coming back to car manufacturers, because it's an easier thing to grasp than cybersecurity. But when a car manufacturer, creates a vehicle today, there are certain standards. It has to, on impact and front impact, there's certain survivability rate for the passenger, right? So that means that they cannot make a vehicle that will crash into a wall at 10 miles an hour and blow up. That's not according to the standard. But in cybersecurity, there's nothing like that exists. Companies can potentially run businesses and use software that doesn't have seatbelts, or has the gas tank right in front, right where the bumper is, so It can blow up, and there's no control of it. So, is the industry just not mature enough to create these standards? What stops us from creating these standards the same way we do it every, the healthcare, pharmaceutical, manufacturing, almost anything we touch in our lives has, well, at least in kind of first world countries, has standards associated with it to protect the consumers, protect the employees, and so on. Why don't we have that in cybersecurity? I know it's a tough question.
Yeah, that's a tough question.
But you're a smart guy, so
or just willing to blab on. So there are plenty of standards,
Yeah.
right? There's no paucity of standards, whether you're going to look at whether you think of standard in a big sense, like the NIST framework, or you think of something more precise. And in sectors of the economy, of course, there are regulators, sectoral regulators that have imposed, that have been very prescriptive about what kind of standards you have to employ. The New York Department of Financial Services has a set of obligations that you have to deploy that are both procedural and substantive and technical. In the financial realm, that there are standards. You talked about HIPAA. There's both you talked about the healthcare industry. There's both a privacy rule and a security rule under HIPAA. Of course, you can also point to the rates of problems in those in healthcare and wonder about the utility of those. Those are standards that are there and are enforced draconianly by the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Health and Human Services on the HIPAA side. So it's not that there's a paucity of standards. It's that we don't have a generally accepted single standard. If you point to the car industry, yes, there are minimum safety standards that don't permit you to construct what would be an unsafe car, if given that low definition. Then there are all those ratings that come out from the insurance industry, automotive ratings, right? That give you gradations of safety above safe.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And what is the utility of those things, right? So
Exactly.
I think the issue that we face is the one that you identified at the very beginning, which is that we are not really set up in a way to mandate a single standard for everybody when it comes to cybersecurity, mostly because we are a country of just a boatload of entities with data, right? In our country, it's largely a private sector problem. We have X number of companies that are public, and so have regulation in many respects through the SEC and other places. But we have many, many more entities that are not public entities, that are small, medium-sized, even large entities that are not public. That means they are closely held. Their shareholders might be their founders and their leaders. They are on a shoestring. Many of the smaller ones, they don't have the budget or the capability of imposing anything meaningful in the cybersecurity realm, although I would maintain that basic cyber hygiene is not a costly endeavor in any way, shape, or form, and it is easily within the reach of almost every company. But we just don't have an overweening regulatory structure that would permit that. We have the 50 states. Every one of them has someone who thinks they're in charge of cybersecurity. We have the federal government, where CISA has taken on a role within the government as a regulator, but outside the government in the private sector is more of a champion and a bully pulpit. We have the FTC, which has limited resources and tries to enforce this reasonableness rule across the country for all the entities that aren't otherwise regulated in a vertical sense. So we have this mishmash of regulators, and I think that is the key to why we don't have a single rule. If we had if the FTC had the ability to issue a cyber rule, which it really doesn't because of the way Congress has hamstrung its rulemaking powers in this area, we would at least have the possibility that an entity that wasn't otherwise regulated by some other vertical sectoral regulator would have a rule to follow. But right now, the rule they have to follow for fear of getting investigated by the FTC, and the FTC has brought 60 odd cases in 20 years. It's not a very rapid thing.
It's not a lot. It's not a lot, see all things considered. And we're a knowledge-based economy, right? So this is the problem. As you mentioned, data is everything, and even manufacturers is how they manufacture things. But isn't it so we're shooting ourselves in the foot a bit, because this is, again, you can agree or disagree with me, but it's a matter of national security. The private sector is the backbone of the economy. In being hit by ransomware cases, or companies being shut down, at the end of the day, that hurts all of us. And now we're seeing cases of even worse, like the kind of the oil refinery and the oil pipeline, and potentially other, SCADA type of attacks on our infrastructure. So why not solve it, or at least provide some? Again, you were great at you know uh, you know showing or declaring a problem to the CEO of Verizon, and but also providing a solution. So, in your mind, what can we do to fix this, aside from creating one large entity to go and rule them all?
Well, yes, one ring to rule them all. I think that if we, first of all, we need to separate out the concerns that we have about personal information from the concerns you just mentioned, which are the much more.
By the way, I love, Randy, how you can tell you're just such a mindset of a lawyer. You take and dissect. You have like different topics, so you always dissect the matter at hand to various different, like, you can tell, like, the way you think is you dissecting the topics and making sure that we answer the various ones depending on the matter at hand. I love it.
Well, I'll do my best. I'm doing my best. So if you separate out personal privacy issues, right, which I'm not saying are not important, but in comparison to the issues you just mentioned, pipelines being shut down, ransomware shutting down companies, and the like, the national security aspects of it, I think I would rate those as more significant problems. I would then follow on the rule of another CEO I worked for, Lowell McAdam, which was major on the majors, right? So we have to turn our energies toward the issues that are most important. We shouldn't expect the ability to fix all of the problems that we face very quickly. And on the individual personal information side of the ledger, we have this problem of individuals sort of promiscuously putting their information out into the digital world and being pretty slow and uncomfortable and unwilling to invest in making their own individual security more important. So I would put that as a lower, harder problem. I think the bigger problem is the hardening of our critical infrastructure. That's what I worry about more in the scheme of things. And I think that we need to embrace the notion that hardening our critical infrastructure, which is overwhelmingly owned privately in the country, is going to be a series of smaller steps, not bigger steps. I don't think there's going to be one ring to rule them all. I think we're going to look like Ringo. We're going to have a lot of rings to be able to deal with these problems. But we have to turn toward the most important problems. A draconian way of looking at this is, if you're going to be in the critical infrastructure business, the cost of doing business there just went up. And the cost of doing business in the critical infrastructure business is mandated hardening for cybersecurity concerns, and the ability to spring back from ransomware, the ability to have redundant systems and the like is expensive. But it's just going to be part of the cost of doing business. That cost will be passed through. I don't pretend for a minute that it won't be passed through, and it should be passed through. But the government can ease the way. The government can provide incentives to get this stuff done, and the government can also back up the carrots that it gives with some sticks. And I think the government needs to do that in the critical infrastructure realm much more pronouncedly. And I think that, the administration, the current administration, has some wonderful people who have sacrificed to go in on the cybersecurity side, and I salute them. But I also think that, we need to take some pretty affirmative steps on that front, and that has started.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see that as well. There's a lot of regulatory environment being put in place right now. So you're a part of an organization now that fulfills a gap. The specific cybersecurity program is intended for those that are fulfilling roles, currently technical roles, but also want to get smart again about the compliance and legal aspect of it. So tell me a bit about the program, and again, how do you fill that gap specifically, and what that curriculum looks like?
Yeah. I'm very proud to say that it goes both ways, David. It not only have folks who are in technical roles, but we have lots of folks who are in legal, marketing, compliance, accounting, sales, other roles. I think that, one of the important aspects that I would hope that modern corporate America embraces, when I was at Verizon, one of our standard sayings was that compliance is everybody's business. And it's a good thing to say, and it's the right thing to say. I also think that cybersecurity is everybody's business. And if you're on a team where you're the salesperson or the marketing person or the whatever person you are in a team, and people aren't asking the questions about what kind of data are we going to have? Why are we going to have that data? Where's that data going to be? What are we going to use it for? How are we going to protect it? If that's not part of your product development team, then you're missing the boat on this, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And Randy, I'll interject here real quick, is that it's also some companies use that as a competitive advantage to doing business. They increase the velocity. If they already have all the ducks in the row, they can increase the velocity of transactions. They don't have to go all the dotted lines and after the fact or pre-signing a deal. So so it's becoming even more pronounced in a certain aspect as well.
Yeah, I agree. And it would be a great thing if cyber readiness and cybersecurity actually became much more of a competitive advantage. I think it's a little hidden right now. I think people like to say that they're getting a competitive advantage from their cyber posture. I find the data in the real world pretty lacking that is true. But I'm all for it if it were true.
You heard it here first, folks.
In any way, the way we try to bridge the gap here between the legal and the technical, we have a great program. It is a mixture of synchronous and asynchronous learning, so that there's COVID pandemic aside. It's a year-long program. There are 16 credits in the law school. There are 9 credits in the engineering school. So every semester has a mixture of policy and legal classes, really policy classes, because we don't try to turn people into lawyers, just like we don't try to turn the non-technical people into technical people. Our effort here is to give both sides the literacy and the capability of asking questions, of being appreciative of the answers, and to lower the the wop factor, what I call it, because if you don't have a little literacy on both sides of this equation, you fall prey to the technical people talking techno jargon, thinking they're going to whap one past you, and you fall prey to the lawyers, putting in therefores and thereats everywhere and thinking they're going to one past you. So you need to have that literacy in order to get rid of that sort of that techno babble or that legal babble that people try to throw at each other. And then underlying this entire thing is a year-long capstone project. We have wonderful mentors for the capstone project, from industry, from technical, from legal. We have ex-prosecutors, we have CISOs, we have all these wonderful mentors that help with the capstone projects. And then we have these classes, and as I said, it's a mixture of synchronous and asynchronous. We meet for 1 week very intensively each semester. Again, COVID aside, although we are aiming to come back this October together. By virtue of that, by virtue of a wonderful set of cohorts that we have had and we have right now, we have a high incidence of folks who are ex-military. We have a broad swath of companies represented and entities represented, from the government, parts of the government, to major financial institutions, to the FANG companies to all these different areas. All this information is up on our MSCRS, Master of Science in Cybersecurity Risk and Strategy website at NYU, and people can look at it. It's by virtue of this wonderful cohort that's got a huge amount of experience and great mixture of experience, along with the professors that we've got teaching this, that we get a real ferment, a real mixture going on, and a lot of learning that's student to student, lots of discussions, lots of beers, and it really is a wonderful program. That's how we try to bridge that gap between the two.
And these folks that they graduate, what type of roles do they typically fill, and what do you find that they after graduation? What are they kind of the takeaways from an impact perspective? Like, what do they carry with them to their places of employment when they're done? And because that's really the legacy of the program, is what impact it has on industry eventually.
Yeah, and we're 4 years old, so it's even now it's sort of a relatively youngish age. I'm really heartened by the stories that we get back from our graduates, folks who are, they're usually, as I said, they're in all sorts of different roles. Some roles have little to do with cybersecurity. Some are deeply and entirely cybersecurity related. Those who are outside of cyber largely tend to try to pivot in some way with their newfound learning and their credential. They've been very successful in doing that, leaving whatever role they've had in either in the same firm, manufacturing a new role, lawyers who figure out a way to become the counselor to the CISO because of their newfound abilities, or technical folks who are angling to get that chief information security officer job, either in-house or either in their place they are or another place, or leaving the government with this credential and going into private industry with it. They have reported back to us that they have, it was great. I had one woman who went to a job interview and came back and emailed me and said, I murdered absolutely every question about cybersecurity.
Was she using those exact terms?
Yeah, murdered it. Yeah, the exact terms she did. Or folks who've said, I've people who are directors on companies and say, I've been able to change the way we do board meetings around cybersecurity because I've already sort of been able to implement some ideas that we've discussed and new ways to heighten concerns and review it. And this is from someone who she's an expert, and she's a cyber expert already. So I think folks have found it very useful. These are folks in mid-career, most of them, and so they already have experience somehow, and they're not babes in the woods. So they take a very clear-eyed view about the risk reward of investing in this degree, and so far, thank goodness, it's worked out. That they've found the degree useful. They've been recommending it to their compatriots to come. Which I think is really the best reference we have, right? If you're going to tell one of your coworkers you should go do the same thing, that's a pretty personal imprimatur for the course.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wish we had a little bit more time, and I would love to host you in our in-person events in the next few months when things open up, and things are open up. So, but I'd love to kind of end in a positive note. We discussed pretty heavy, difficult topics, but the sky is not falling, right? Things have despite all the difficulties, and we don't work with widgets. These are all complex topics and technologies and so on. What positive aspects have you seen in the past several years? Things that we have improved, maybe from a legal cybersecurity perspective, from kind of your point of view.
Well, first of all, I generally agree with you that the sky is not falling. I'm an optimistic guy. I think that we have an immense, we are very young at this. We've taken something that was never meant to be secure, the internet. It was not created that way. It was not meant to be a secure method of communication. We've built the entire framework of modern society on it. So the positive aspects of the internet cannot be denied, right? As much pain as people will say, and we'll have people arguing about Section 230 and what is Facebook doing, and oh my God, misinformation and ransomware and all that kind of stuff. Think of the benefits. The benefits are immense, and they're immense commercially. They're immense for free speech. They're immense for social interaction, right?
Learning.
It comes with risk. Like every other aspect of our lives, there's risk to it. And I think, I would hate to attribute this to our sort of seemingly endless fascination with being risk averse, which I don't live my life that way. And I think that that's a tough way to live your life. But, I think that first of all, we need to have this appreciation of the immense bounty and the immense benefits of the digital world that we've created. Then we need to turn our attention to this problem, right? And in the last few years, in my opinion, I think awareness has come up a great deal. I think that we are becoming more and more creative about ways to layer on or spread the gospel about the need for cyber hygiene further and wider and deeper than it has been before. I think we still need to work on that. I think we need to think about more the social ways that we have incorporated these sorts of benefits in the past, building codes, the need for mandatory insurance if you drive a car, those sorts of things, those sorts of socially accepted aspects of risk spreading and risk mitigation that we do and we live with every all the time. I think if we spread that around more, it would be a great thing. So I think that there are a lot of green sprouts. There are a lot of green shoots in the field here. It's not all a wasteland to do it. I think that there's plenty of low-hanging fruit and plenty of opportunity staring us in the face to make things even better. We will not exterminate this problem. It will be a nagging problem forevermore. But the extent to which we can at home spread the gospel and spread the word about cyber hygiene, it's a great thing. And the extent internationally, we can take steps that will influence some countries around the world to be less hospitable to bad cyber actors. That would be a great thing. So I think that there are green shoots here, and I think that we should look at them, and we should look at this entire problem in the right context.
Randy, I absolutely love it. I think that was a perfect ending and a very positive note. And I agree with you. I'm a positive person as well. And we have to be as cybersecurity professionals. And then the green sprouts are everywhere. And you're right. All things considered, we're a very young industry. We don't even exist that long. All things considered. What's the best way for people to reach out to you? You're prolific in your publications and so on, but if somebody wanted to reach out about the program, mentorship, just insight, what's the best way?
Well, our all of the stuff about the program is on the Masters of Science Cybersecurity Risk and Strategy website. I'm available on email, rsm2024@nyu.edu, and I think that's probably the best way for people to get in touch with me if they want to get in touch with me. The only social media I do is LinkedIn. And I'm not even sure that's social media, though it's becoming more social media every day, unfortunately. And I love the last time I saw someone in a comment said, "This was a nice Facebook post." And I don't think the person got it. I don't think the person posting got the message. Nevertheless, that's the best way. I hope people will take a look at at our master's program and the other stuff that we try to do at the center. And David, I really appreciate your willingness to have me on and to talk with me and spread the gospel. I'd be more than happy to come to one of your live events and blab at people in face to face.
That'll be amazing.
Is there alcohol at your events?
Absolutely. It's well, do you know any other events that are successful without it?
No, I don't.
Pretty much given. It's part of your program, right?
In the evenings.
Sometimes,
very
yeah.
measured,
So absolutely. Would love to have you in person, and thank you again for your contribution to the cybersecurity space and overall for attending this session. And thank you all for joining, and looking forward to